We begin this morning with the war in Ukraine, where Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd are now the highest-ranking U.S. officials to visit the country since the start of Russia's invasion in late February.
Sunday's visit was shrouded in secrecy and only confirmed by the White House after the U.S. delegation had left the country and arrived in Poland. In a meeting with President Zelenskyy, America's top diplomats pledged additional military aid and the return of American envoys to the country. That meeting comes as Ukraine's Orthodox Christians marked a somber Easter yesterday as Russian forces continued to pummel the eastern part of the country. Speaking after that meeting with Ukrainian officials, Secretary Blinken said Russia's military campaign was not succeeding.
The strategy that we've put in place, massive support for Ukraine, massive pressure against Russia, solidarity with more than 30 countries engaged in these efforts, is having real results. And we're seeing that when it comes to Russia's war aims, Russia is failing, Ukraine is succeeding. Russia has sought as its principal aim to totally subjugate Ukraine, to take away its sovereignty, to take away its independence. That has failed.
We've got NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli live from Washington alongside our foreign correspondent Kelly Cobiella in Odessa, Ukraine. Good morning to you both. Mike, let's start with you. How did this surprise visit come about, and what's in this latest military aid package the U.S. is pledging?
Well, Zinkley, over the last month, of course, we've seen a number of high-level European officials travel into Kyiv, including the British Prime Minister, the European Union Commission President. So there had been discussions within the Biden administration about whether and how to send in a high-level U.S. delegation, whether to perhaps be Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin. In the end, the Biden administration decided to send both. And you're going to hear a number of superlatives surrounding how this visit came to be today. It really is unprecedented, the kind of security logistics that were involved. Both of these men arriving separately in eastern Poland overnight on Saturday and then traveling 12 hours in and out of Kyiv by train before they returned to Poland, where they then began to lay out some of the deliverables, because that had been one of the questions, whether this was purely a symbolic visit or whether they would come with specific things to further deepen the commitment between the U.S. and Ukraine. One of those is a $713 million financing to help modernize Ukraine, but also some of our Eastern European allies' weapons systems from some of these Soviet-era systems to more modern equipment. Here's Secretary of Defense Lloyd describing some of what these leaders discussed overnight.
In terms of their ability to win, the first step in winning is believing that you can win. And so they believe that we can win. We believe that we can win. They can win if they have the right equipment, the right support. And we're going to do everything we can, continue to do everything we can to ensure that that gets there.
Now, you see there Secretary Austin actually standing in front of some of that equipment that is on its way into Ukraine. Now, as we talk about this visit, let's also underscore the fact that that President Zelenskyy sort of preempted this by announcing publicly that they were on their way to Ukraine before this even happened. That did raise some concerns about the security on the U.S. side, but a senior U.S. official downplaying that overnight, saying simply that this is his country and it's his right to discuss what he wanted to.
And hey, Kelly, it's Savannah. I want to bring you in here. So let's talk about Ukraine's reaction to that support that Mike just outlined there. I mean, Ukraine's President Zelenskyy actually said on Saturday that any world visitors coming to Ukraine not come empty-handed. So how is this meeting received and this support? Are they satisfied with it?
Well, when you listen to what the president of Ukraine said after that meeting, it certainly sounds like it. He said that the U.S. was offering unprecedented assistance. He thanked President Biden, the Congress, both secretaries of state and defense for their visit, and as well as the American people for what has been just an incredible amount of military aid flowing into this country since the war began. More than $3 billion in military aid, closing in on $3.5 billion in military aid over the past several weeks. He said that this new package of military assistance will bring the defense capabilities in Ukraine to a new level. He didn't get specific on exactly what that means, but he did say it was extremely important for the defense of this country. At the same time, the Ukrainian president, as always, is saying this country can always use more and is still pressing for tougher sanctions against Russia. That's something that he's been talking about, as we know, Savannah, for weeks now. Savannah?
And so clearly a high-stakes meeting. Mike, aside from additional military assistance, the U.S. also nominated a new ambassador to Ukraine and signaled its readiness to send envoys back to the country. Tell us more about that. And could we see the U.S. follow other countries by opening its Kyiv embassy anytime soon?
Yeah, this is going to be a slow process, but let's start with the new ambassador, Bridget Brink. She's currently the U.S. ambassador to Slovakia. Now, this is significant because Ukraine has not had a Senate-confirmed U.S. ambassador in place there since 2019. That's when President Trump fired Maria Ivanovich. That's a familiar name from his impeachment trial. So this is going to be an important symbol of the U.S. returning a full-time ambassador with the president's support on the ground to be better coordinating on a daily basis with the government there. Now, the U.S. also indicating that they are prepared to now begin slowly returning U.S. diplomatic personnel into the country. Remember, they had originally left Kyiv, moved to Lviv, then into Poland. They're now going to begin daily visits in and out of Lviv, and then eventually the goal is to get them back to Kyiv.
And Kelly, quickly before I let you go, I do want to ask you more about what's happening on the ground there. Many in Ukraine celebrated Orthodox Easter over the weekend amid, of course, this just continued shelling and bombardment. What's the latest where you are? I know also in Odessa, which did suffer an attack, even though it had been relatively safe until now.
Yeah, and just to explain what's happening behind me, Savannah, this is actually cleanup from that missile strike over the weekend, which hit this apartment building in Odessa. You can see where it made impact and also just the extreme damage done. About 8 people killed, among them a 3-month-old little girl, her mother and her grandmother in this strike. And the first strike on a civilian location in this city since the war began. So this has created an awful lot of anger toward the Russians after this strike in particular. As for across the rest of the country, the British intelligence assessment this morning said that the Russians had made some minor gains in the east, but no significant progress in their war there. And Ukrainians said today that just in the past couple of hours, there have been some strikes on 5 different rail systems in the central and western part of the country. They said there are casualties, but haven't given details yet on those casualties. And Savannah, just from a personal perspective, here in Odessa, someplace that has been relatively safe over the past few weeks, we've just heard almost hourly air raid alerts since we arrived on Saturday morning.
All right, Kelly, thank you for describing that on the ground to us there. We're thinking, of course, about that family and that infant. Mike and Kelly, thank you both for your time and your reporting this morning.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.